Hey everybody, how are you? I'm so thrilled to be bringing you today's video because I think it's a very important thing for everybody to understand, and that is the difference and the importance of understanding inherent risk versus residual risk. What do we mean when we talk about these terms? And these are things that you're going to come across a lot when you are doing your risk assessment and having risk management conversations. So I thought it would be a good idea to kind of bring this topic to this platform, share some information with you, and make sure that you have a solid understanding. But before we jump in, as always, thank you to all my new subscribers. Welcome to the family. Welcome to the channel. I'm so thrilled to have you. And if you're here and you're just, kind of watching the videos, but haven't made that commitment, I hope you're not a commitment phobic person. Click on the likes, subscribe to the channel, and press that notification bell so that whenever I upload a video, you are the first to know and, can jump straight into, finding out what it is that I'm here to share with you on the channel that day. But let's get straight into the meat and bones of what it is that we are here to talk about today, and that is inherent risk versus residual risk. So, what is inherent risk? Inherent risk is the intrinsic risk that is associated with a particular activity before you put in place any sort of measures to manage your risk. So, you've chosen to do something as an organization, as an individual. What are the risks associated with that before you say to yourself, okay, this is a high risk activity. Let me kind of put measures in place to manage and minimize that risk. So the intrinsic inherent risk associated with a particular activity before you implement measures to reduce that risk. That is your inherent risk. So let's think about it this way in the context of examples and analogies, which I love. Let's say you want to cross a road. There is a busy road, you're on a highway. Cars on that highway are going at 120 kilometers per hour minimum, right? We all know there are rule breakers out there. There are some people who are out there doing 140, 160 and beyond. But the rule says maximum 120. And let's assume that that's the speed people are driving at. If you choose to cross the highway and people are driving at those speeds, you are engaging in a particular activity, and there is an inherent risk associated with that activity. And what is that risk that you need to assess? The very high risk that you're not going to find a clear gap and therefore get hit by a vehicle and have serious bodily harm or loss of life as a result. That is the inherent risk of the activity you have chosen to undertake, of crossing a highway where cars are traveling at 120 kilometers per hour. So that is a high risk activity. Now, inherent risk is going to be different depending on the nature of the activity. If, however, you are walking along the countryside, it's a quiet street, barely any traffic, it's holiday season and everybody's left town, whatever the case is, and you decide to cross the street, and the speed limit on that street is, 60 kilometers an hour at most, then the inherent risk of that activity has reduced because you're going to have a lot less traffic. The speed limit is much lower. So even in the rare event, if it's a low likelihood of you getting hit by a car, because the speed limit is much lower, let's actually lower it from 60 to like 20 kilometers per hour, the impact, the severity of the injuries and the potential for loss of life is going to be a lot lower in that activity, because inherently crossing a street where there are extremely few cars, and even when they are there, they're traveling at 20 kilometers an hour, means that the inherent risk of that activity is a lot lower, even if you have done nothing to mitigate or lower or manage your risk, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about inherent risk. How much risk am I taking on by conducting a particular activity, even if I am not putting in any measures to manage my risk? Residual risk is therefore what is left over, the residue after you mitigate and have controls in place. So now you've said you want to cross a busy street and you've inputted a traffic light. They've put in place a zebra crossing. There's now an individual manning the road and, helping people across the street. Those are all now controls that have been put in place to make it safer, even though it's a high risk activity like crossing a street. But we're doing it now where there's a managed intersection and traffic lights and all of that and zebra crossings. So you have put in place measures to reduce the risk. That's now your controls. And if your controls are effective, then your risk level is going to be reduced. But we never eliminate risk completely. I've said this in previous videos that it's impossible to have zero risk unless you don't do anything. The only way to have zero risk in terms of crossing a street is to not cross the street. So if you still want to cross the street, there could still be the likelihood that someone would ignore the traffic light when it's red and, the fact that there's a zebra crossing and just send it on the road. And in the midst of you obeying all the rules of the law, unfortunately become a casualty of that. So there's always going to be a little bit of risk left over as a result of you engaging in that activity, even in the presence of various controls and risk mitigations. And therefore, that amount of risk that is left over after controls is your residual risk. So if we think about it in the context of an organization, they've decided that they want to launch a new product into the market or sell to a new customer base, for example. They have to say, okay, what is the inherent risk associated with this business activity that we are engaging in? You're going to look at your jurisdictions that you're operating in, the nature of the product, the type of customers, and come up with sort of like a risk profile and say, this is a high risk product, or the customers that we're selling to are high risk clients living in a high risk jurisdiction, whatever the case may be. And then you say, okay, this is the inherent risk associated with this type of product. What measures can we put in place to manage our risk? We can be maybe making sure that we've got strong consumer education so that the wrong people don't get their hands on this product that's not meant for them. We have great assessments of the customers that are eligible for these clients. Maybe it's a complex product and you need to make sure that you're only offering it to sophisticated type of customers who understand the nature of the products, the risk associated with the products. Your terms and conditions are clear and easy to understand. You've got post-sales activities. You've got monitoring of the sales staff to make sure that they're selling appropriately to the right customers and not just selling to anyone for the sake of reaching their targets. You then put in place certain measures to make sure that those who are actually exposed to your products and service are the intended users, and therefore you are managing the risk of your products and services causing harm to people. We've seen recently product recalls happening with vehicles in the South African context, and it's happened globally in different instances. So that's something as well where products are released. They've got control mechanisms afterwards to check and have a look at, the functionality of the products that they've put out there. They're receiving customer complaints, investigating customer complaints, and then realizing that actually we've got a consistent problem here, and then recalling the product. So it's about what measures have you put in place, whether it's preventative controls, detective controls, or reactive controls that you're implementing in your organization to manage your risk exposure based on the activities that you're doing. Now, another reason that residual risk is important to know is that if your residual risk levels are still quite high, you've put in place controls, you've now assessed your residual risk level, and you're like, actually, we started with a high risk and now we're only down to a medium high risk or a high medium risk level. And it's not within the comfort zone of the organization. It can trigger you to then say, we need to put in more controls to further lower the level of risk that we're exposed to. And that's going to be based on the risk appetite of your organization. An organization will say, okay, we're comfortable with the risks in the green, which is your low risk or your amber space, but anything, that's now high amber going up to red, we have to implement more internal controls to manage that risk. So the good thing about knowing your residual risk is that you then understand if you are sitting within the comfort zone of your risk appetite, and if not, you need to implement further mitigations to lower that risk even further. And the good thing about understanding your inherent risk, I saw a question on social media the other day where someone was like, why do we even need inherent risk? It's important to understand the worst case scenario, and that's what your inherent risk tells you. What is the absolute worst thing that can happen as a result of engaging in a particular activity? And that is what your inherent risk rating tells you. That if we have no controls in place, or if all our controls fail, this is the impact of the activity that we're engaging in. And it motivates then what type of controls you are going to put in place. What you don't want is to find yourself with something that has a low inherent risk rating and you're implementing $1 billion worth of controls to manage this low risk item. So your inherent risk rating also informs you as to the nature of the controls that you're going to put in, how severe and extreme you need to be with it. If it's a super high risk, like you're going to lose your business license and not be able to operate, you're going to put in place appropriate controls because you have an understanding of the consequences of failing. And that's why inherent risk is something that's really important for you to understand. It's not some theoretical topic that, it's a waste of time. Understanding your worst case scenario informs the type of controls that you are going to put in and how much residual risk you are then going to be comfortable with as well at the same time. I hope this video was helpful and you now have a much better and clearer understanding around the importance of understanding your inherent risk, putting in place mitigating controls to manage your risk, and then seeing the level of inherent risk residual risk that you have left over. And if your residual risk level is still high, it means you need to put a plan in place to put in place more controls and mitigations to lower it until it is within your comfort zone. And that's it. Simple, easy to understand. And I hope now when you're having those conversations and trying to explain the importance of measuring your inherent risk and measuring your residual risk, you are able to articulate that very well to your peers and your business stakeholders and anybody else you're going to be having that conversation with. Have a fantastic day, guys. Thanks for watching the channel. Keep supporting and remember, subscribe. I appreciate you. Bye.